Hey everyone, today we're doing another YouTube video. It's going to be a tutorial in Adobe After Effects, and I will be going over professional camera movement in Adobe After Effects. So this is something that I think a lot of people aren't too familiar with, and you might notice I have made a video about this in the past, but it's something that if you can, and you will understand it after this video, it's a really powerful tool that you can use in every single video you edit in After Effects. So today we're going to be using a camera and a null object to move around in 3D space and create a slideshow, really professional looking sort of thing like this. And what's really nice is at the end of the video, whatever we have created, I will upload that so you guys can download that in the description and just play around. Hopefully you get a better understanding of how camera and null objects and 3D space works in After Effects. Alright, so we can jump into the tutorial. We're going to start at the new composition. Mine's just 1280 by 720, and I'm going to select OK. And I'm just going to drag in my Polaroid image. So this is just an image of a frame that I'm using, and that's what we're going to be using. And we're also going to need a background image. So when you're choosing a background image, we're going to try to find one that doesn't repeat, or one that does repeat. We want one that when we add motion tile isn't going to be super noticeable. So try to find a repeating image. That way when we throw in our motion tile, and let me scale this out so you have a better understanding, you'll see that it's not exactly noticeable that it's repeating here. So wood is pretty good. I know people use crumpled paper, etc. So there's a lot you can use for your background. So we have our images that we're going to be using. We also are going to need our camera and our null object. So let's go up here and let's grab those real quick. Let's create a camera just using the 50mm preset. Going to select OK. And now I'm going to create a null object, layer new null object. And now I'm going to pair my camera to my null object. Gonna select camera, double click A, and then I'm just gonna turn on my depth of field. And let's close that. Hit your toggle switches / modes if you can't see it. And we're going to make all of our layers 3D. Alright, so that is perfect. Now let's quickly orient our background. For this case, we're not going to make it too complex. Let me shut off viewing this. I'm just going to orient it in this direction. Actually, let's do it in this direction first. Let's orient it like so. So this is how we're going to orient it. That way we don't get too much repeating, and that's perfect. So when you get more advanced with cameras, you can try orienting it in different ways. For this tutorial, we're only going to orient it in this direction, and that's going to make it easier for us. But again, you can do some really neat stuff when you play around with different orientations. So right now we have it just oriented like this. Let's turn on our Polaroid image. Now, right now you can see that we can't see it completely, and this is a great way for me to explain how 3D space works in After Effects. So you can tell we can see the top part here, and then it sort of disappears towards the bottom. The reason that this is happening is because in terms of our Z distance, how far something is in the 3D space, because we oriented this like our background like this, the wooden plank is actually located behind the top part of the frame, but then as it comes closer, it's located in front, and that's why it sort of gets cut off like this. So that was just a quick explanation. It might not make sense, but you don't really need to understand it. We want to get our orientation similar to what our background is, so we just barely see it above, right? And then we can always go into our position and move our Z position up a little bit. That's perfect. So now we have our first sort of scene. We have our frame located on the wood. That's the first step of this tutorial. Now I'm going to show you how you can do some transitions and do some cooler stuff with that. So because this is located in 3D space, I can go up to my camera tool, and let me just zoom out with this Z tracker a little bit. Let me zoom out a little bit. And we're just going to get a nice wide view of how we want this to work. So we have our first image located here. Let's get a second image and a third image down. So I'm going to duplicate that, hitting Control D. And now just going to position those ones over. Try not to drag in 3D space because it can it can get warped and it can start dragging into different areas and then changing all your settings. So try to use your values to move around your images as much as you can. So we're just going to separate them. And now for the first one, I'm going to add a different orientation. So let's orient it even more. Let's orient it in this direction. And then for our other image, which we have on this side, let's orient it again in the opposite direction. And this time we're also going to add a scale, so we're going to scale it down. All right, so now we're going to go through, we're going to do some practice with our camera and a null object, and you guys are going to see that we're going to have a really cool sort of slideshow effect by the end of this. So I'm going to use my Z camera tool to zoom back in. Go back to my selector tool. And now I'm just going to use my null object to control the movement of the scene. So I'm going to open up scale, hitting S, Shift P, Shift R, and let's position this over right to where our first clip is. So let's position it, scale it up, and we're going to orient it as well. Oops. Oh, these orientations are getting a little wacky. The reason that the orientation is like this because this is so far off. So let me just go position and let me actually push this back down until it just disappears. It's going to make it easier for us to use orientation to control our movement here. And let's scale it up and position it across. So let's say this is where we want our first clip to start. I'm going to keyframe position scale orientation. Now let's say I wanted to go over a specific amount of time, so let's go over 2 seconds. Now we want to transition to our next one. All we're going to do is position over, scale it out. And then reset this. And then position this over. And then let's go another 2 seconds, and we're going to do the same thing. Position it over. Orientation is wonky right now. The reason it's so weird is because this Z position is off. Just my mistake earlier. So let's make sure we push this Z position so it's just above the piece of wood. So it's just over there. It's going to make it easier for us to try and orient it better. How do I want this oriented? Kind of like this, and like this. And then I want to position it over, and position it up. So we get a nice view of this. Okay, that's perfect. So now if I pull through, again, this first orientation is a little bit off. I don't want to spend too much time, but I guess I can go and try orienting it a little bit better. Let's try that. Let's try and figure this out. Okay, so we want it up, facing up, yep. We want it oriented like this. Yep, and then I want it scaled out a little bit. Alright, that's perfect. Okay, so now if I just preview through, you're going to notice that we do have the sort of transitions that we needed. It's going to scale out as it orients towards our second position, and then from our second position, it's going to go scale back in and orient it a little bit so that it hits our third position. Now this is exactly what we wanted, and we did it all in one, like we can control all of our movement in this one null object, which is really, really nice, really, really useful when you're creating projects. So now all we're going to do is we're just going to right click, keyframe assistant, easy ease all of our keyframes, and let's have it pause a little bit on each of our scenes. So let's say we want it to stay here for 1 second. I'm going to highlight these, copy them, paste them here, and then let's move over. This is going to be our transition, and then we're going to copy those keyframes again, and we want for 1 second for it to stay there, and then we want it to transition over one more time, and then again we're going to copy those keyframes, and then 1 second across we're going to paste them. So now it's going to stay at each of our scenes for 1 second before it transitions over. And let's also enable motion blur. So I'm going to enable motion blur here and here. Just going to make our transitions look a little bit nicer. Oh, okay, so we need to actually enable it on all the scenes instead of the null object. That's going to allow us to get motion blur. Okay, so let's preview through one more time. Gonna stay there for 1 second, and then it's gonna start moving, and you see we have that motion blur now. Just gonna make our transition look even nicer. And now we're pulling over to our next scene, which is this one right here. Stay there for 1 second, and then it's gonna move over to our last scene. And there we go. And it moves over to our last scene. So that is some pretty basic camera movement. Some things that we can do to make it look better, and I'm gonna run through these pretty quickly, is we can go and we can add some movement here so it's not just sitting still as we're looking at our scene. So for example, we can scale this. Let's set this to 40 and have it zoom in a little bit. Scaling is the easiest one. I'm gonna let you know right now, you won't have to play around too much if you're just scaling. If you're doing orientation and trying to have it move using orientation as it stays here, it can look a little bit weird, so try not to go too excessive with your orientation changes. So let's say we wanted to start at 0 and then we wanted it to end at like 2. That shouldn't be too excessive. Yep, and then it's going to transition over, and then I wouldn't recommend keyframing position. How about we do scale one more time and we just scale out this time. So I'm going to go here, we're going to grab our scale, and let's set it to 54. And that's the opposite direction. Let's set it to 62. Just scale it out a little bit. Alright, that's perfect. So what's really nice about having 3D space and working using cameras and null objects in your projects is, one, when you're keyframing, everything, all your movement can be controlled in one layer. So you don't have to go into each individual clip, which can get a little bit messy when you're working with a lot of stuff. And two, it's a lot easier. So right now it may seem a little bit confusing using cameras and null objects, but once you have the hang of it and you're able to use it, you can use it for almost all of your projects. And it does look really, really nice, and it is very, very easy to maintain. One more thing while this is rendering. So because we have this oriented in 3D space, we can add anything else we want, any other element. We could add a marker in 3D space or a piece of tape, and it would work perfectly. It would render perfectly. So again, just one more reason why cameras and nulls are very, very useful in After Effects. Something I think a lot of you are really going to start using more of, hopefully. And yeah, that was the reasoning. So there we go. We do have those 3 transitions looking pretty nice. Oh, one last thing. Another thing that I forgot to mention. We can throw our images in here without having to do any movement on our images. So let me give you an example. Let's say I grab this image right here, and then all I have to do is turn this into a 3D image. And right now I can't see it just because of how it's oriented in space. So let's see if I can find this image. This is not the greatest part for me to find the image. All right, so here's the image right here. So it's a 3D image scale. I'm going to open scale, position, rotation. And now all I have to do is I have to orient it. So we're going to pick an orientation that's similar to the orientation of our other ones. So let's check our orientation here by hitting R. And we're at 3, 13, and 28. So let's set it to the same one. 3, 13. And let's set it to 28. Okay, we don't need to set it to 28. Let's keep that at 0. And let's position it up. And let's scale it down so it fits into our frame. So just like that, without having to do anything other than move it into our frame, it's going to stay perfectly with our transition. Right, so we don't have to do any keyframing or any movement for that because it's in 3D space, because we used a camera and a null object. We can just place it in, and it's going to act accordingly with how we have those keyframes set up in our null. So again, really, really, really useful. I highly suggest you guys explore and play around with cameras and null objects. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and be sure to leave a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button.